Hi, this is Amy Collins. You are watching a recording of a webinar that was held on April 16th, 2024 for employees of Harris County Department of Education on developmental dysgraphia for OT practitioners. I hope you find it helpful and thanks for watching. I like to start out with this quote and really sets the stage for talking about dysgraphia and the development of writing skills. Our bodies are really hardwired, right? And to learn by doing. So when you think about that in terms of handwriting, it becomes really clear that in order to learn how to recognize and to form letters, which is all part of reading and writing, then our bodies need to be involved in the process of writing by hand. So since we know, and all OTs know this is like probably one of the basic tenets of occupational therapy. We know that when we are not doing things with using our bodies, using all of our senses, that it can be more difficult for us to learn. So we have to really ask, as technology continues to flourish and take hold of our daily lives, and we're using technology for more and more every day, there have been debates in education about, should we even still be focusing on handwriting, and is it really that important? And also, is something lost when we're having kids focus so much on using technology and typing on computers and their phones versus writing with pencil and paper? So we're going to kind of answer that question. And I want to tell you about a study that was done in 2012 by Karen James and Engelhardt. So what they did is they took 5-year-olds who were not yet reading, and they probably weren't in some of the districts that you work in, but somehow they found 5-year-olds who were not yet literate, and they taught them letters, and they divided them into 3 different groups. So one group was learning the letters by printing them, one group was learning by typing the letters, and a third group was learning by tracing the letters. Okay, and then what they did is they took these 5-year-olds and they hooked them up to fMRI machines so they could see what was going on in real time in their brain. And while they were hooked up to the fMRI machines, the children were shown letters. And so what they found was that only the children who had printed the letters showed activation in the areas of the brain that we know are involved in reading. So what that shows us is that handwriting letters actually facilitate letter recognition, which is a precursor to reading. So the handwriting aspect and the letter recognition aspect, which is for reading, are really closely intertwined. And we know through lots of other research studies that have come out that there are lots of important benefits that we get through handwriting. One of them is that it promotes emergent literacy skills, such as letter knowledge, concepts of print, vocabulary, and phonological awareness. Handwriting words is believed to have a significant impact on the development of our spelling skills and abilities. Students who write with ease produce better quality writing in terms of their vocabulary, their length, their critical thinking, and their organization skills. And we'll get into a little bit more about why that is a little bit later on. And students who take notes by hand actually understand the information at a deeper level. And to me, that one is just so fascinating. I always thought growing up, and I'd always heard that if you want to remember something, write it down, right? I don't know if you guys have heard that in the past, but The reality is, when they study this, they have groups of people who take notes by hand and who take notes by keyboarding, and they found that the actual memory, the actual recall of information, like facts, is exactly the same. So there's no benefit to recalling information if you're handwriting. However, the students who are handwriting, or the subjects who are handwriting the information to take their notes, understood things better on a deeper level. I thought that was really interesting, that there's something about writing it down that forces your brain to kind of think about it and understand it, even if it's not something we're doing in our consciousness. So there are also consequences of kids who have difficulty learning how to write with ease. Of course, they're going to have difficulty keeping up with their peers, so they may have difficulty completing assignments on time. They may get behind. And then a kind of a domino effect of that is they try to rush through things without really taking the time to think about what they're doing or what they're writing, or taking the time to use the vocabulary that they're using, or the grammar or punctuation, or all the other components of writing that are involved. They also have a reduced working memory capacity. So much of their working memory is having to devote itself to the actual, how do I form this letter? And how do I write this? How do I spell this? Or maybe putting spaces between the words, or figuring out where to fit your words on the line and within the margins. That there's not very much working capacity left over for thinking about the kind of higher order parts of writing, like tone and purpose and point of view, and all the things I just mentioned about vocabulary and syntax and grammar and all those types of things. Another really kind of sad thing that you guys probably see in the classroom is that kids who write very sloppy can be, or who write very messy, are sometimes just seen as sloppy or lazy, as if they could help it if they really just put any effort into their writing, whereas a lot of times they are putting as much effort as they possibly can into the writing. It's just something that's very, very challenging for them. And so we know from other research that there is an effect where teachers will subconsciously grade down a paper that is written messy. So if they have, if two teachers are given two papers that have the exact same content, and one is written very neatly and one is very sloppy, the tendency is to grade the sloppy work lower, even though the information, the content is identical. And that's just a bias, and it's kind of a subconscious bias that a lot of people have. Also, these kids, they suffer from low self-perception, low self-esteem. They recognize that they're not able to do what their peers can do. They do it more slowly, and that can really affect their feelings about their self-confidence when it comes to being a student. Also, tend to have lower academic achievement, especially in math, reading, and spelling. They show a lower verbal IQ, so they know and use less words in their speaking and in their writing. They have greater attention difficulties at times. Less content is generated. They use a smaller vocabulary in their writing, so you might hear some kids might talk using bigger words, and then when they write, they're using just the smallest, most simple to write words as possible. They have less cohesive organization of their writing, and they may have difficulty taking class notes. If they're expected to listen to a lecture and to take notes, not only are they probably not hearing a lot of what's said because they're so focused on trying to write what they are hearing that they're getting behind, and then they may not even be able to read what they've written down later on. So those are all kind of secondary problems of difficulties with writing. So we really need to think beyond legibility. And I say this because it's kind of the way, I think the way I was trained to look at handwriting is, do they have the ability to write? So if I take them out of the classroom and I have them do writing samples, do they show me that they can write the letters, or even copy the letters from a model? And I really want you to think about going beyond legibility when you're thinking about kids that have either writing problems or developmental dysgraphia, because there are other things that we need to keep in mind and to address with our kids that are struggling writers. So, okay, everybody take your left pointer finger, hold it up in the air. All your cameras are off, so I can't see you doing this, but hold it up in the air. Okay, I want you to touch it to the top of your left ear. Okay, now I want you to move it up about 1 inch and then move it back towards the back of your head about 1 inch. Okay, you're all pointing to this spot, a little bit behind and above your ear. This is the part of the brain in most of us is nicknamed the brain's letter box. It's also called the visual word form area. So the job of this particular area is highly, highly specialized in humans, and its job is to recognize letters and words in print. That's like, you have one job, right? And that's what it is. We have other areas of our brain that are specialized to recognize faces or recognize objects, but this one is strictly to recognize letters and words. This area, when you're looking at brains on an fMRI machine, this is the part of the brain that lights up when you are looking at letters or words and not when you're looking at other objects. So remember when we talked about that James and Engelhardt research study from 2014, this is the part of the brain that they were really looking at that was lighting up. And if you don't recognize what you're looking at as a letter, this part of the brain is not going to be activated. This part of the brain also helps us distinguish letters that are mirror images, like B and D, for example, to recognize reversals. And this helps us recognize letters in all their variations. So you know that the A in Whataburger is the A in Chick-fil-A, that's the A in McDonald's, right? No matter what size, what font, what color, you're going to recognize that that is a letter B or whatever letter. All right, I'm going to take just a sec to look at the chat real quick. Yes, I will send out the this PowerPoint to everybody, as well as the link to the webinar. No worries. All right, so let's talk about orthographic processing. If we're going to understand developmental dysgraphia, we have to understand orthographic processing. And what that is the brain's ability to make sense of written language. It's our ability to form, to store, and to recall letters and words in the brain. The letters and words are known as orthographic codes. And this orthographic processing is really necessary. It's critical for automatic letter production. Okay? We have to be able to visualize something in our head. So everybody close your eyes for a second, and I want you to picture a capital T. Okay, so if you can see that capital letter T in your head, that means your orthographic processing is probably working just the way it's supposed to be working, and that little area that we were pointing to a few minutes ago is lighting up. All right, so let's see if it's gonna keep working. All right, so just a note about orthographic processing versus decoding, because these are kind of like education terms, right? These are not terms that as an OT I was real familiar with. So I really wanted to kind of understand them. So orthographic processing is recognizing whole words as a unit. So also known as sight words. So we think about sight words, right? That is really orthographic processing is the ability that allows us to see a chunk of letters and know that that's a word. Okay. Decoding, on the other hand, is breaking down words into smaller units, which we think of that as kind of phonics. All right, so people who have difficulty with orthographic processing, these are some things that we might look for. They might have a variability in the way they form their letters. So you might even see within one sample of writing, they're going to form their letter A different ways, and it's going to look different even within the same sample. Or they might have frequent reversals after first grade because they're having difficulty distinguishing that part of the brain that codes the way the letter looks is having difficulty distinguishing between letters that are pretty similar, like P and Q or B and D. They will often have difficulty with spelling. They can't visualize those words as a unit. They can't picture them in their head. Like when we picture the word which, right? We're basically picturing those 5 letters as a unit together. And people with difficulty with orthographic processing have a lot of difficulty doing that. They may spell the same word different ways because, again, they can't remember it. They are likely to have difficulty copying from the board because what you have to do is you look at something and then you have to hold it in your brain while your eyes look down at the paper. So you have to be able to have that short-term memory and picture it long enough to get it down on the paper, and they have difficulty with that. They may also confuse upper and lowercase letters in print and confuse those in their writing. They may confuse letters that have a similar appearance, like an N and an H. They may transpose letters like on and no. All right, so let's take a few minutes and look at this little writing sample. This is a 2nd grader, and he wrote, "One time I went to Nintendo Land with somebody, mom and dad. Then I was playing." All right, so I want you guys to look at this for a minute. Think about the challenges with orthographic processing that we just talked about, and put in the chat things that you see from this writing sample. I'll give you guys a minute to do that. All right, y'all are doing great. I'm seeing some good comments. Let's keep them coming. All right, so we've got the H and the N look the same. One of them is backwards, so we've got a reversal. Absolutely. The S is reversed, looks like a Z. P is capitalized incorrectly. Upper and lowercase letters are interchanged within the sentence incorrectly. Poor Kathy. I hear, I've seen a couple of you guys saying there's blue squares or a huge black square in the middle of the screen. I don't know if that's everybody or if I don't know what that's about. I'm so sorry. Then we have spelling issues, spelling errors, even with copying the word. I'm not sure if the student was copying this or if the teacher maybe typed what the student was trying to say underneath so people could read it. I really don't know the answer to that one. My thought was that they probably asked the student what they were writing about so that they could write the words underneath, but I could be wrong. Letter A is not written consistently. Absolutely. The N in the word one is reversed, looks different than the N in then. All right, good job, you guys. I think you got all of the things that that I saw when I looked at this writing. So you think it's likely that this kid has some orthographic processing issues? I think definitely. Okay, so let's look at the other component, which is graphomotor skills. And this is really important to understand as well when we're talking about dysgraphia. So these are the perceptual motor skills that affect movement for handwriting. And we're going to focus in on a few graphomotor skills. One is motor memory, or kind of think of that as how does my hand go when I'm writing. And we want to look for, when we're thinking about issues with motor memory, we want to think about if we see them hesitating before they're writing. Widely varied letter formation could also be attributed to motor memory issues. Crossouts and erasures, and a preference for printing over cursive. And you'll notice that some of these issues can mean more than one thing. Like, for example, the widely varied letter formation could be signs or indicative of more than one thing, but they're just clues, and we have to, continue to look further. All right, so graphomotor skills, we're going to look at also motor planning and implementation, thinking about what's my plan and how do I execute it. And we want to look for an excessively tight graph on the writing implement, running out of space on the paper, inaccurate copying, or very slow and labored writing. It just looks really effortful for them. And then kinesthetic feedback, we can think about this like, what does that feel like? And we would look for things like keeping the eyes very close to the paper and visually monitoring the pencil point to see where it's going, because they don't have the sensation to feel their fingers on the writing utensil. Also recruiting larger muscles to compensate for the lack of sensation or lack of, not sensation, but lack of feedback to the brain from the fingers. Using an awkward or uncomfortable pencil grasp. We're going to talk, circle back around to pencil grasp later on in the presentation. But for now, suffice it to say, before you try to change a pencil grasp, think about whether they might be trying to find a position that gives them the feedback that they need to know where their pencil is on the paper. It could be a compensatory strategy that they're trying to use. Also using excessive pressure, complaining about their hand tiring or cramping, and you might see a decline in their writing legibility or their speed, or just their stamina in general over when they're writing longer passages. And a lot of times their speed is impacted more than their legibility when kinesthetic feedback is an issue. All right, so here is another writing sample with Caleb in the 4th grade. Let's look at that for a minute. Think about what we talked about with orthographic processing and graphomotor, and put it in the chat what you see. Okay, so we see it looks like a lot of pencil pressure on this writing, and maybe varied pressure. Yeah, I would agree with that. Mixed case, confusing upper and lower case, poor letter formation, capitals instead of lowercase letters, scratching out their mistakes. Looks like the student put a lot of effort into writing each letter based on the varying pressure. Lack of pencil control. The letters have sweeping movement patterns. Interesting. Difficulty with visual placement and organization. I did notice that the student was writing on graph paper, but if you look at the content of the writing, this looks like geometry to me. So maybe that everyone was writing on graph paper, or maybe that just the student used graph paper as an accommodation. All right, so do we think that this kiddo might have some graphomotor issues going on? Anybody want to take a guess at that? Their best opinion? All right, I'm going to say yes on that. I'll go ahead and close the chat. Oops. All right, so just briefly, mostly for any new therapists, just to review the peak for writing by grade level. This is kindergarten through 5th grade peak. These were revised, I think, in either I want to say 2017, could have been 2018. I'm thinking it was 2017. But for a while, the writing peaks kind of almost went away, and then they brought them back. All right. So I really like to show this graphic because this is a graphic representation of all of the different parts of the writing process that have to be integrated before a student can write well and have good written expression. And so I think we can see, when a student is kind of stuck here with the handwriting or the spelling, then all of these other things are going to possibly, go to the wayside, because remember, the student only has so much working memory that they can devote to the writing process. And if this part here is taking up a lot of their working memory, then it's going to be really hard for them to do all these other things and to integrate them all together. And sometimes we see that, and then sometimes we see the reverse, where we know they're really focusing on, maybe punctuation or spelling or sight words, and then we see the handwriting decrease, right? Because they just can't do it all at the same time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of automaticity. And this is the ability to write letters or words without having to think about how to do it. And then very related to that, a close cousin, we've got fluency, which is how quickly we can produce letters correctly. So automaticity is kind of the prerequisite for fluency. You have to be able to know and to produce those letters automatically without thinking about it in order to write with fluency. And fluency significantly affects the written expression quality. With low fluency, individuals can forget their thoughts or their plans that were held in their working memory. So that can really be a problem. Okay, so we talked about the importance of automaticity and how that leads to fluency. So remember when I talked about we need to really expand our thinking beyond legibility. We need to be looking at a student's ability to write automatically. Can they write the letters of the alphabet without thinking about it, without struggling to remember? Can they do it without a model? That's really important. And then are they able to write the words fluently, or do they really struggle? Are they really slow in doing that? So those things are really important. Okay, automaticity, we talked about that. Okay. So legibility plus fluency is where we're able to develop written expression. So it's really important to have both of those components in order to write with ease and to be able to focus on all those more complex, kind of higher order thinking skills and writing skills that were in that writing rope. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of definitions of dysgraphia. I like to include two different definitions. There's not really one accepted definition, but this is a definition that would probably be pretty similar to what we would see in the community setting. So a doctor that was looking at diagnosing dysgraphia would probably use a definition that was pretty similar to this, which is an impairment of handwriting characterized by difficulty with legibility and or fluency. Dysgraphia is listed in the DSM-5 under the specific learning disabilities category, but it's not defined as a separate disorder at this point in time. And there's actually no specific diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5 for dysgraphia. But yet I think it's come a long way, because it used to be just defined as poor writing. So now you can see, based on the evidence that we do have, it's becoming more and more refined. And I really think that our understanding of dysgraphia is in its infancy. I think over the next 10 to 20 years, we'll really have even better understandings of what the brain, what's happening in the mechanisms of the brain that are contributing to problems with writing. So that is kind of just a generic definition of dysgraphia. And now let's look at the one that is in the, Okay, so this is the definition of dyslexia that is currently in the dyslexia handbook, which you can find on the TEA website. You Google it. And this says that dysgraphia is a neurodevelopmental disorder that's manifested by illegible and or inefficient handwriting due to difficulty with letter formation caused by deficits in graphomotor function, again, the hand movements learned used for writing, and or deficits in the storing and retrieving of orthographic code or letter form. So what we see are just a lot of similarities between the two definitions, but a couple of differences as well. One of those being is that the dyslexia handbook refers to dysgraphia as a neurodevelopmental disorder, which is more specific than the other definition that we looked at. And it also goes on to talk about deficits in graphomotor function and difficulty with orthographic processing. So what that means is that when we're talking about dysgraphia at school, for school purposes, we are really talking about developmental dysgraphia. We're not talking about other types of dysgraphia. So what does that really mean? Developmental dysgraphia, this is what happens when a child experiences difficulty in developing the writing skills despite adequate instruction and cognitive potential. Okay, and we want to differentiate this from acquired dysgraphia, which would occur when existing brain pathways are disrupted by some type of event, like it could be a brain injury, a degenerative condition, a neurological disease, which results in loss of previously acquired skills. Okay, so remember the first definition that we looked at, which would most likely be used by a doctor in a community setting, doesn't necessarily distinguish between developmental or acquired dysgraphia. And then we have other conditions. So these are things like could be autism, could be a traumatic brain injury, could be cerebral palsy, or other reasons for a student to have handwriting issues that don't fall under the definition, the pretty narrow definition of developmental dysgraphia. Okay, so a question that I always like to address is, are there subtypes of dysgraphia? Because some people will say that there are certain subtypes. And when I was researching this, I found some articles proposing anywhere from like 3 to 7 subtypes of dysgraphia. But the bottom line on this that I want you to know is there is actually no consensus among researchers at this point in time that subtypes exist. And if they did, we certainly don't have any consensus about what they might be and how many there might be and what they are, or how to define them. And some newer studies actually demonstrated that it's the interrelation between the brain areas that are responsible for automaticity, for language, and for motor coordination that may really be at the root. And so we may kind of move away from thinking about subtypes as we get a better understanding of, like I said, what's going on in the brain. All right, so this is straight from the dyslexia handbook. These are what they list as the characteristics of dysgraphia. We've got variably shaped and poorly formed letters, got excessive erasures and crossouts, poor spacing between letters and words, letters and number reversals beyond the early stages of writing, awkward, inconsistent pencil grip, heavy pressure and fatigue when writing, and slow writing and copying with legible or illegible handwriting. So you could have perfectly legible handwriting, but if it's not fluent, if it's very slow, then they could still have dysgraphia and be identified as having dysgraphia. So as far as the prevalence, the best estimates that I could find are between 7 and 15% of children may have dysgraphia, and the exact prevalence really depends on the definition of dysgraphia. So when you look at the literature, you'll see those numbers changing based on how widely or how narrowly they're defining dysgraphia. And just think back to the two definitions that we talked about. You know, if you're using one that's more narrow, like the one in the dyslexia handbook, you're going to end up with a smaller number. If you're looking at a little bit broader definition of dysgraphia, then you may be looking at like maybe 10 to 30% of students, but it really varies based on how they chose to define it when they were looking at the prevalence. And as with so many neurodevelopmental conditions, dysgraphia is more common in boys than in girls. So one kind of take-home message that I really hope to leave with you guys is that there are serious consequences of students progressing through school without effectively addressing dysgraphia. It's not something that goes away on its own. It's not something that kids grow out of. And so when you or a teacher or someone, you know, notices that a student seems to be having difficulty with their legibility or their speed, their fluency, their automaticity, learning and remembering the letters or sight words, you know, it's really important that that student be looked at for testing to see if they are identified as having dysgraphia, so that interventions and other supports can be put into place as soon as possible, because these kids, if they don't get intervention early on, you know, they do start to suffer from poor self-esteem and self-confidence, and they become kind of reluctant writers. You know, they don't want to engage in the writing task because it's so difficult and frustrating for them. And sorry, I don't know why it keeps doing that. And then, you know, they just don't want to write at all. Then sometimes they will exhibit behaviors in order to kind of get out of the writing path. And we see that a lot as OTs, and teachers say they're just misbehaving. I've seen kids who were just kind of model students, and once the writing demands got past their ability to keep up, and they recognized that their peers were able to do things that they weren't able to do, they, you know, they just started exhibiting these severe, you know, meltdowns and crawling under the table for writing paths and things like that. So I've seen that be, you know, really happen really dramatically. Okay, so a little bit about the identification of dysgraphia. I didn't go into a lot of detail because diagnosticians and licensed specialists in school psychology, LSSPs, are the ones that are kind of mostly responsible for making the identification of dysgraphia. But I want you guys to kind of have an understanding of it, and this has become even more important, as we'll talk about later on in the presentation. It's even more important now than ever for OTs to have an understanding of how dysgraphia is identified. So anytime the school suspects that a student may have dysgraphia and they need services, they must ask the parent for consent to conduct a full and individual evaluation. And that is in the handbook, dyslexia handbook. So what is the OT's role in identifying or diagnosing dysgraphia? So, you know, OTs do not diagnose. at all. OTs do not identify dysgraphia. That's done by, again, the DIAG or the LSSP through the FIE process. And in the community setting, a diagnosis would be made by either a physician or a clinical psychologist. And the OT can certainly be a part of the collaborative team that is evaluating a student for dysgraphia. And I think we are, the writing is on the wall. We're going to see more of that to come, and I'll explain about that in a little bit. So how can the OT practitioner contribute to the FIE? This is stuff you guys already know. It's just, you know, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just a few of the many things that an OT can contribute in terms of data collection to the FIE process. Okay, so these are some examples of writing assessment tools. The reason why I picked these particular tools, because they all had both a legibility and a fluency component. So I did not include any tools that did not look at fluency, that, you know, only looked at the legibility of letters. And there are several that look at both components. Okay, so just a note about the VMI. I think it was last school year. I think some of you guys went to a workshop where someone said something about the VMI not being a good tool for this, that, or the other. And there were lots of questions about that, and if we should be using the VMI, and if so, what for. So in terms of its ability to help us identify dysgraphia, what I want you to know is that what the VMI does look at is component skills of writing, like motor control, visual perception, and visual motor integration. It doesn't have any components that look at memory, that look at automaticity or fluency. And research studies have shown that it is not a reliable predictor of handwriting legibility or speed and fluency, and it's not correlated with handwriting ability. It is correlated, in fact, the one thing it is correlated with is near point letter copying. It's also not been found to be a reliable measure for handwriting outcomes, so for showing change over time in handwriting or determining progress. So it's not saying that it's a bad tool. It you know, it certainly will have its uses, but understand what it can and cannot do for you as an evaluator. All right, these next couple of slides are just to show you a couple of different norms for fluency. And you'll have those in the PowerPoint to refer back to. Some identification considerations. This is straight from the Dyslexia Handbook. Are there difficulties with graphomotor function and or remembering how to form letters? Has effective classroom instruction been provided for the student? Are these difficulties unexpected for the student's age in relation to the student's other abilities? Gosh darn it. It is not one single indicator. Okay, there's not a single test or a single indicator that can identify a student as having developmental dysgraphia. It's a preponderance of data and information that's been gathered to determine whether these difficulties are indicative of a student who has developmental dysgraphia. Okay. So how is dysgraphia generally addressed at school? This is, I've seen and heard a lot of different answers to this question, so I think it's pretty varied across districts at this point. But remember, all these things are pretty new. This renewed emphasis on dysgraphia And dyslexia in the schools is still relatively new for schools to grapple with. So I think and I hope that there will come a little more uniformity over time with how districts are recognizing the best ways to help students who do have developmental dysgraphia. So how to help a student, there's not a one-size-fits-all method. Just like everything else in special education, it's individualized based on the student's unique needs. So this is a decision that's made by the student's ARD committee or 504 committee. And if the student does need special education, he or she will receive a disability designation of SLD or specific learning disability for written expression. Now dysgraphia, looking at special ed versus 504. Some of you guys may already be very well aware of this, but I actually, I'll tell on myself, I wasn't actually super clear on what made a student eligible for or have a need for special education until probably in the last, 7 or 8 years. I really got a better understanding of it when I started understanding what specially designed instruction was and what it meant. So if the student is determined to be eligible for special education, the student's IEP must include appropriate writing instruction. Okay, this is in the dyslexia handbook. That is not negotiable. Students, if they're in special education and they have dysgraphia, then their IEP must include appropriate writing instruction. Okay. If the student does not need specially designed instruction, then the student might still receive, that means they're not going to be eligible for special education, at least not for dysgraphia. They might still receive appropriate accommodations and services under Section 504. So just to kind of recap that, I probably didn't say it all that well. There's a two-pronged approach to looking at eligibility for special education. One is they have to have one of the 13 disability categories, right? Autism, speech impairment, specific learning disability, intellectual impairment. You know what those are. The second prong is, do they need specialized instruction? So you might have autism, but you don't need specialized instruction in order to benefit from your education. So that student would not be in special ed. Because they have autism, they still could receive 504 service. Same for ADHD, same for dysgraphia, same for a lot of things. Like vision impairment, for example. So that's really what that means. And if they don't need the specially designed instruction, they could still get some supports and services through 504. If they do need specially designed instruction, then their IEP must include specially designed instruction. Makes sense, right? So intervention planning for students with dysgraphia at school. Like again, we talked about the specialized instruction. What is the amount? What is the type of intervention that student needs to decrease the severity of the student's disability? Those are the individualized decisions that the ARD committee will make about the specialized instruction. Also, the student may need modifications. These are things that the ARD committee can consider that may be appropriate for a student with dysgraphia. Do they need changes to their curriculum requirements for their writing goals that need to be adapted from the teeth? Also, the accommodation. Does the student require supportive or assistive resources in order to address the curriculum, including assistive technology? And then finally, related services such as occupational therapy. The ARD committee will need to determine whether occupational therapy is needed for the student to benefit from their education. And some students may, and some students may not. This is just kind of a sample art agenda because I just want to remind everyone that the art committee follows a general sequence when they're determining what needs to be in the IEP. It starts with the eligibility and the present levels, and then we have goals, and then way down here is are the services that the student requires to benefit from their educational program. So all these things should really be talked about and addressed and determined before we're making a decision about whether a related service such as OT is needed for the student to benefit from their education. Okay, so you guys probably heard last was May or June, we had House Bill 3928, which they dubbed the dyslexia bill, and it also addressed dysgraphia. And some of the things that were new of note were that a qualified person will be required to serve on the multidisciplinary team who completes the evaluation and the R committee when determining a student's eligibility for special education and the State Board of Education must determine what the training requirements and credentials are for this person, but they need to have specific knowledge in the reading process, dyslexia and related disorders, and dyslexia instruction. And they didn't really address in this dysgraphia specifically, other than to say, yeah, it kind of makes sense that the same thing holds true for dysgraphia. So you kind of had to try to read between the lines, but it was a little bit vague when it comes to dysgraphia. And so this has been in place this entire 23-24 school year. So now, one of the things that that I didn't mention that was in that House Bill 3928 was that it called for the dyslexia handbook to be revised, and the deadline that they put for the revision was July of 2024. So they have now come out with a dyslexia handbook draft that you can go and look at, and I included the link to it here. Not a whole lot of changes for dysgraphia, to be honest, but there is one major change that is likely to affect all of us OTs, and that is that, and I put this in quotes, this was on page 70 of the draft, there likely may be a need for an occupational therapist on the committee to assist in addressing all required areas of evaluation for dysgraphia. So that's very interesting, and we'll just have to wait and see how districts are going to interpret that and handle that, and if that wording will remain or be altered in the final dyslexia handbook comes out. So they had an open comment period during the month of March that is closed now, and so they're looking at those comments that were made, and then they will be finalizing the 2024 dyslexia handbook, and it will be you know, in use for next school year. So be aware of that. Okay, so what is really the school-based OT practitioner's role in addressing dysgraphia? Number one, to read and understand the current dyslexia handbook, especially the dysgraphia section. There's a whole section on dysgraphia. If you've never read it, I highly recommend that you read that section. It's a pretty easy read. It's not written in, you know, difficult terminology. It's pretty plain spoken, and it's, I think, really helpful. Also, the OT, when appropriate, when requested, when needed, the OT should assist in a collaborative evaluation process. and also assist the art committee to develop the IEP to support the individual student's needs. Just some examples of looking at the role in addressing dysgraphia from a multi-tiered systems of support or RTI kind of framework. At tier 1, the OT might be a campus resource for evidence-based handwriting instruction for all students, and we're going to be getting to that very shortly. On tier 2, OT might consult with instructional staff, such as dyslexia specialists, etc., who are providing some dysgraphia instruction in order to provide general strategies for students who are struggling with handwriting. So these are students that, we have not evaluated, so we cannot give individualized recommendations, but we could give some general strategies to students that are struggling. And then in tier 3, when warranted by OT evaluation and the art committee decision, we may provide OT directly and indirectly to individual students in collaboration with the instructional team to co-implement collaborative goals. And how do we decide? Well, again, remember the I stands for individualized. So there's no one size fits all. There's no OT should always be involved with dysgraphia. There's no OT should never be involved with dysgraphia. Simply have to look, just like we always do, we look at the other supports and services that are in place. We look at the goals that are in place for that student. And then we determine whether the additional support of OT is needed for the students to benefit from their education. So we kind of already talked about a lot of this stuff. All right, yeah, we pretty much covered that. So let's talk about what works for dysgraphia instruction. And the good thing about this is the same things work for all of our struggling writers, and the same thing works for all of our beginning writers. So this is really like one size fits all evidence-based information, whether the student has dysgraphia, other writing issues, or they're just a beginning writer. This is what research tells us works, and also we'll talk about a couple things that evidence does not support as well. There we go. Okay, so thinking about encoding and decoding words. So decoding is taking letters and turning them into sounds, figuring out what sounds they make. And encoding is just the opposite of that, taking sounds and turning them into letters. And those really need to go together. So we want to think about not separating the writing of letters from things like the letter name and letter identification and the letter sound. Those should all be taught in conjunction. Here are a couple of really important things to include in handwriting instruction. We want to be really explicit about handwriting instruction. As one of the hallmarks in any workshop that you attend on dysgraphia, you're going to hear the word explicit instruction. So what does that really look like? Well, some of the things that looks like are using a motion model. A motion model really just means demonstrating for the student how to form the letters in real time. Instead of just showing them a letter that's already drawn, we're actually going through the motion of forming the letter in the correct way and in front of the student so they can see how it's done. There's no research at this point in time to show that it needs to be a human that is creating the motion model. So for example, it could be a YouTube video, it could be an iPad app, or some kind of computer program, but it's showing the formation of the letter in real time. Also using visual cues, so numbered arrows. I have a picture of some of the stuff in the next slide, using visual cues like numbers and arrows to show the starting points, the ending points, and the directions of the stroke in sequence is really important. And also using a consistent language when you're talking about the letters. So here's an example of using the numbered arrows to make the letters. And then over here on the right, you probably all recognize the handwriting without tears, wood pieces, and handwriting without tears does a really nice job of using consistent language with their letter pieces. They have the, oh gosh, I'm blinking out. I know it's the big curve, little curve, long, big line, little line. That's what it is. And so they do a nice job of looking at language. I will just throw in, I don't have a slide on this, but I'll just throw in here that in case you're wondering, is there one handwriting program or curriculum that is more effective than another one? So far, the research has not borne that out. What it showed is that having a handwriting curriculum that is explicit and systematic is effective. So a lot of these programs and curriculums that school districts are using are effective. There's not just one or two that are better than the other. Okay, so some things we want to keep in mind. We talked about a little bit about explicit. Also, we want to bring in systematic. It's really important that the instruction be systematic as well. And one of the strategies that teachers can use when they are teaching handwriting that works is the I do, we do, you do method. So the I do, that's the motion model. That's the direct instruction using the visual cues, using consistent language like we talked about. And then the we do, this is guided practice. So the teacher and the student are doing it together at the same time. And then you do is when the student is practicing the letter. And what's really, really important about this, and I really can't stress this enough, although I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on this, practice should always be supervised. Practice in handwriting is not meant to be an independent activity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's important to supervise the practice. When a student is practicing, it's important to provide feedback to the student on what they're doing correctly and what is incorrect. We want to teach them to evaluate their own writing, to look and be critical of their own writing so they can see whether it matches a model. For example, teach the teacher is a really good strategy where the student is going to describe or maybe use a motion model to show the teacher the letter or explain to the teacher how to form the letter. And that's one of those just really fun and motivating strategies because the kids love to be, the bosses for a minute and to be in charge. And avoid handwriting homework because we can't control the feedback and we can't control the practice because we're not able to supervise it. So just some general do's and don'ts. We want to provide frequent but brief practice opportunities. I think a couple of my slides got out of order this morning when I was looking at it because we haven't gotten to that yet. But provide frequent but brief practice opportunities. Supervise the practice sessions. Provide explicit feedback to the student. Teach self-evaluation skills. Teach the teacher. Don't give independent handwriting worksheets, don't give handwriting homework, and don't prioritize the product over the process. It's more important for students to get messy, make mistakes, like in the Magic School Bus, than it is to have a perfect product. And I know, again, I'm preaching to the choir on that. All right, so yeah, this one was supposed to be before the last one, so sorry about that. But we want to give the students frequent and brief supervised practice opportunities. So what research has told us is at least twice per week, they need to be practicing, and about 10 to 15 minutes at a time. We don't want to do too much at one time. And then we want to follow an intentional order, so a very systematic order. Generally, we like to use capitals teach capitals before lowercase letters. It's good to introduce generally like 1 to 2 letters at a time, and then to build on prior learning. To begin with the simpler strokes, such as why they tend to start with capital letters, and to group like-formed letters, such as a C, a D, and an A. I know, again, the Handwriting Without Tears program uses the magic C and then builds on that curved stroke to form other letters, and I think that's a good strategy. All right. And then at least 20 sessions are needed in order to see improvement. So if you've got a kid who is receiving dysgraphia support, you want to make sure that they're getting enough practice opportunities, which means at least twice per week. And we want to give them at least 20 sessions in order to see if we're going to see improvement. So we don't want to be necessarily, too quick to throw out handwriting in lieu of using technology or accommodations instead of writing. But at the same time, we want to make sure that they're getting evidence-based handwriting instruction, that the teachers are using strategies that we know work in order to teach handwriting. Okay, so if this works, we're going to watch a brief video. This is a handwriting instruction, slightly goofy, but I want you to look at this and I want you to be thinking about what evidence-based strategies did she use or not.
We use Slack as our central nervous system. We connect multiple applications into it. It's Jira, Notion, Figma. It's all there in one place. It enables us to operate in the best way possible to get work done.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to my classroom. Today, we are going to learn a new letter. But before we start, you are going to need a pen, a pencil, or a whiteboard marker, and a blank piece of paper or a whiteboard. So quickly go get it, and then we'll get started. Are you ready?
Yes!
Okay. Now the letter we are going to learn today is the first letter of the alphabet. Do you know it?
Yes!
That's right! It's the letter A, and it looks like this. This is uppercase A, and this one is lowercase a. Now, the letter A sounds like this. A. A. Can you say it with me? A. A. Can you say it faster? Good job! Let's practice writing the letter A. We will start with writing the capital letter A. So get your pen and let's start. When we write the letter A, we are going to make 3 lines. Now look carefully. We go down, down, and across. Very good. Let's try it one more time. Down, down, and across. And there you have an uppercase letter A. Can you see that it looks a little bit like a triangle? Now, let's do lowercase letter A. For lowercase letter A, we are only going to make
All right. Y'all, drop in the chat what you saw. What did she do that was evidence-based? She's the motion model. Absolutely. What else? Visual cues. Consistent instruction. Yep. Visual cues for stroke direction. Explicit steps to form the letter. Very good. Did you see anything that that she maybe, it's not that it's not evidence-based, but something that you might have done differently? Black marker on black line difficult. I actually agreed with that. Yeah, I thought that at the same time. She introduced upper and lowercase letters at the same time. Yeah, that was what I was thinking as well. I would probably stick with the uppercase letters at first. I know that's kind of a common practice, is to do the upper and lower at the same time, especially with a student who is identified with dysgraphia. I would probably stick with capitals, because we know a lot of times they can have difficulty with this, getting the uppercase and the lowercase mixed up. And copy versus tracing. Yeah, I agree with that. Don't start with A, even though it's the first of the alphabet. Yeah, you might have started with something that had maybe straight lines, or something that was a little simpler. Good job, you guys. Thank you. All right, so I like this quote when we're thinking about handwriting practice. So practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. Now, I hope you don't think that the point of this quote is to think that the important thing about handwriting is for it to be perfect. That's certainly not the case. The important thing that I think this quote has is that the practice needs to be supervised so that it's done correctly. If they keep practicing the wrong, making the letters incorrectly, then that becomes ingrained, and then we've got problems. So I think that is important for that practice to be supervised, and for them to receive that feedback so that they can learn to do things correctly. Also, as OTs, this is just right in our back pocket, but we want to try to make the writing meaningful, right? We want to encourage our teachers to come up with writing practice ideas and activities that the kids are going to be motivated with. And so that's just some ideas for that. We want to build in motivation, and remembering always that these kids especially who are reluctant writers, it's even that much more important to have motivating tasks for them, and to try and build motivation into the things that they're writing about, and motivating to them. Even if it's, the first letter of their pet name, or, something like that. I know you guys are all super creative. Okay. Some tips for developing automaticity is providing ample practice opportunities, providing the visual model with the numbered arrows cues that can be covered. So you show the letter example with the arrows, and then maybe flip it over, and then have them write from memory, then flip it over again, have them check their own work and compare it against the model, flip it over again, have them practice it again, things like that. That's a really good strategy. Have the students picture the letter in their mind and practice visualizing it. Have the students challenge themselves to see how many times they can write a given letter within a time frame, and they can actually, you know, chart their progress and keep track of their progress with their fluency and their speed of writing. And also make use of spaced practice. So coming back to that, teaching one letter, and then maybe going to a next letter in one practice session, and then at the end going back and reviewing that first letter again. So giving it a little bit of space and then coming back to it is another really good proven strategy for helping kids to ingrain the letter formation, letter form. So developing fluency, we want to help the students to focus on generating meaning over the neatness of their writing, to make fluency practice a part of every handwriting session, to have the students challenge themselves to see how many times they can write a letter. We just talked about that one. Ensure the students have ample opportunities to write across their day, and help students set their own goals for writing speed, and then chart their progress. Okay, so some things that are not as effective. Interventions that only address component skills of writing, like visual perception, kinesthesia, in-hand manipulation, visual motor integration, biomechanical approaches, you know, doing in-hand rotation, in-hand manipulation. Those things have not been found to correlate to improved handwriting. Also, I promised we would come back to pencil grip. So research does not support trying to change a pencil grasp after it's been well established. And we know, you know, probably by the first grade even, that pencil grasp is pretty well ingrained in the students, and it can be very, very challenging to try and change it. And even if you were able to successfully get them to change their pencil grasp, the evidence does not support that will lead to improved handwriting. And then remember what we talked about at the beginning, that some kids who have a kinesthetic issue going on, they may be trying to adapt their pencil grip on purpose to get the feedback that they need for their writing. So just be mindful of always trying to, you know, saying that the tripod pencil grasp is the be all end all to writing, because it's not. However, for our very, very early writers who don't necessarily have an established pencil grip, it is a good practice to help them establish a good pencil grip. And if you guys have a pen or pencil, just put it like in front of you. If not, you'll get the gist of it. Take your thumb and your first finger and your middle finger, like pincers, and you're going to go ahead and just pinch the tip of that pen or pencil and pick it up right at the point. And then with your other hand, you're going to flip the top back, and now you've got a tripod grasp. The only thing you have left to do is tuck in those fourth and fifth fingers. So that's called the pinch and flip method. And I've actually gone into kindergarten classrooms and taught whole classrooms early in the school year how to do the pinch and flip method, as well as the teachers, so they can kind of start to try and get that habit there for at least you know, the majority of the kids. Another thing that is not borne out by research as being effective is tracing. And in schools, I see that we spend way too much time on tracing worksheets. And not only are they typically done independently without a lot of feedback or supervision, but they're just in general less effective for learning how to write the letters. And some of the reasons for this is that tracing doesn't require the same cognitive processes that occur prior to and during free-form writing. And so it's not as intentional. And if you guys have ever worked out in the gym or done any weight training, have you ever done, like, let's say you grab a dumbbell and you do bicep curl, and then compare that to being on a machine that does bicep curls, and all you do is raise and lower, raise and lower, raise and lower. You're actually getting a better workout when you use the free weights or the dumbbells, because you have to control that motion in, you know, a 360-degree plane, rather than just the up and down motion. And it's kind of a similar analogy, I think, to free writing versus training. Also, when tracing, children tend to focus on the individual segments of the letter and adhering to the lines, trying to stay on those lines instead of thinking about the letter shape as a whole and getting that gestalt in their head that this is what that letter shape looks like. It also may have limited ability to help children to develop, you know, that mental picture of a letter, and it may be less effective to develop form constancy or the understanding that a letter stays the same when it changes size, font, or case. I've heard that, I've read in some studies that they are theorizing that there's something about the free writing of the letter that because it's quote unquote messy, that messier than tracing, that helps them to understand that it can change sizes, it can change fonts, and still be the same letter. So what about cursive? Well, sometimes when cursive might be really helpful are when reversals persist to be an issue for some of our kids, when a student has a lot of difficulty finding their place on the paper when they're copying, or every time they look up and they look back, they have a difficult time finding their spot. Cursive can sometimes help with that. And also when word spacing is an issue, so spacing between the words is an issue, cursive can sometimes be beneficial for that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about accommodations, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I think you guys are probably pretty familiar with these accommodations, but I wanted to just kind of go over them as a part of this because they are a really important way to support our kids with dysgraphia. And to keep in mind that the goal is to allow the student to be able to communicate what they know, what they know while reducing the stress and frustration of doing it. So we tend to categorize accommodations into different categories. So we have things that can accommodate for the rate of production, the rate of producing written work. We have accommodations that can accommodate for the volume of the written work. We can also accommodate for the complexity of the writing task. We can accommodate for the tools that are used in writing. So we talked about needing at least 20 points of data or 20 sessions before we can really determine whether the student is making progress on their writing. So determining whether continued handwriting practice or other methods of written output are should be explored for a student. Our committee will want to talk about which strategy will be more advantageous in order for the student to attain their particular academic goals now and looking forward into the future writing demands and tasks. And so it's a really individualized topic. I don't think there's any one clear answer for when you should quote unquote give up on handwriting with our kids with dysgraphia. But what we would certainly want to do is make certain that we have provided at least 20 sessions of evidence-based instruction, doing the things that work, and then looking at the data from those 20 sessions and looking at, are we making progress? If we're making some progress after the 20 sessions, then we will probably want to keep going with that. Now, again, we can still use the technology as an accommodation so that they don't get quite as frustrated, and we need to determine for that student, what might that look like? And when might that be beneficial or not beneficial? But if we're not seeing any progress after we've provided ample sessions of evidence-based intervention and instruction, then it may be time for the art committee to look at moving on. And it doesn't mean that the instruction has to completely stop, but the art committee may decide to do that, or they may decide to just scale back and put more focus and emphasis on other means of allowing the student to express themselves. All right. So we've got one final case study. I want you guys to look at this and then just go ahead and just start dropping your comments, your thoughts, your observations in the chat. Okay, so we see some orientation errors, reversals, some spacing issues, letter formation issues, word spacing, inconsistent size and placement of letters. Could be an issue with pencil pressure. All right. All right, very good, you guys. You got it. Okay, so I got one final slide, and then we're gonna get to some questions. So just some final thoughts. Addressing dysgraphia early is really important, and help other people at school to try and recognize the emotional and academic challenges and the toll on children who have dysgraphia. Children need explicit instruction and ample supervised practice to learn to write fluently, that they need performance feedback on their work, and use accommodations really thoughtfully and be mindful about eliminating all handwriting without having supporting data of having tried evidence-based strategies. And these are some references. The references in particular that I chose, I literally have like probably 60 research articles that I've collected on dysgraphia, but these ones that I included here, these are all free. These are all accessible. So these are ones that you can pull down and share with others. All right, so let's get to some questions. Let's see. I'm gonna, let's see, stop sharing. Okay. Okay. Christy was asking, is the OT doing these 20 sessions in the classroom in the push-in model? What I would say about that, Christy, is that, you know, the law is pretty clear, and all the information on dyslexia and the dyslexia handbook is really clear that that instruction needs to be a part of the student's IEP, and we are not instruction. We're related service providers. So I would say that they need to be receiving instruction. Now, whether OT will augment that is a decision that should be made by the art committee, looking at what that individual student's needs are. But it's not, in my mind, it's not the role of the OT to be providing handwriting instruction. And the reason why I say in my opinion is because there is one little sentence in the current dyslexia handbook that says that OTs may be involved in handwriting and, doing handwriting instruction or something like that. I can't remember the wording. I'm like, I gotta have a problem with that.
Those are the questions I'm getting now. I'm seeing a lot of, questions come up in the intermediate and junior high level and wanting us to evaluate and then trying to figure out what to do because we're not supposed to pull them out. But I'm getting questions. Well, isn't that what you're supposed to do? Isn't that what you do is teach handwriting? So I'm, trying to field those questions and answer them to where, answer it appropriately and trying to get the students the help they need. Cause a lot of these kids are not, it's happening in intermediate and junior high. It's not being caught in elementary.
Yeah,
that's what I've been finding.
Yeah, I hope that will continue to get better. Like I was saying, the identification of dysgraphia as an eligibility for special education is still relatively new, and I think it really takes education a long time to turn a ship around and to kind of move in a new direction. So I hope that they will keep getting more kind of on the ball with how to deal with dysgraphia. The dyslexia handbook dysgraphia section is pretty clear, and if people read it and become familiar with it, I think it will be clear that they need to be identifying these kids really early on, and they need to be addressing it from an instructional standpoint first and foremost. And the OT, like I said, the OT can certainly help in the data collection process, in the evaluation process of looking at what's going on with the student, and then then the determination will be made by the DIAG or the LSSP if they're going to be eligible for special education. And then if they are, then you would want to just be part of that art committee discussion, but they shouldn't be looking only at OT to try and fix a kiddo who has been identified with dysgraphia, because that's a problem. And you're not the first person that I've heard say that. So
thank you.
Other districts are doing some similar things. They're just looking to their OTs for help and really missing the boat because it's an instructional issue. And that's clear. It's not Amy Collins saying that.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for chiming in verbally. That helps me to understand your question. Let's see. Do we have another question here? Okay, I saw one from, let's see, in our pre-K programs, they teach names as uppercase, first letter, and then lowercase, like in the video we showed, right? I find this difficult to treat from a research-based approach when they aren't teaching all uppercase first. Well, I don't know the perfect answer for that. I know, like I said, we see that a lot, right? We see teachers really like to group the upper and the lowercase letters together for some reason. Because I think their focus is really on the reading component and not so much the writing component. And if you're focused on the reading component, you want the child to understand this is A, and this is A, and this says A, and this says A, right? So I can see, like, from their lens, they're thinking about reading, but I think we can help educate them about the writing aspect of that, which is just as important to helping them read, is kind of looking at the strokes that are simpler for them to make and kind of not throwing so much at kids all at one time. So can we change what they're doing? No, we don't have that power. Can we try and influence and educate? Yeah. Are there other questions? So Adele said, I feel like most pre-K teachers teach that way because the writing expectations for kindergarten and first have become more advanced than previously thought. I think that's a really good thought, Adele. I think there's a lot, they definitely have a lot of pressures on them, and they're trying to get those kids to those peaks. I just sometimes, you know, if you throw too much at people at one time, then it's detrimental. You want that just right challenge. I don't see any other questions, you guys. So if you have one, feel free to drop it in chat or unmute yourself and go ahead and ask, because we have just a couple of minutes left for some more questions if you have any.
Are you going to send the PowerPoint to our Harris County emails?
I'm going to send it to the email that you registered for this webinar on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. As well as a link to the video, the webinar itself. Will I send it today? No. I'll try to get it out tomorrow. I'll do my best to get it out in the morning. All right, guys, any last questions? Okay, if you want to go ahead and put in the chat, did you learn one new thing that you didn't know before, or one thing you found interesting? Drop that in the chat. How to easily access the dyslexia handbook and the update with OT in it. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Stephanie. Tracing is less effective than copying. That I should read the dyslexia handbook. Basic info about dysgraphia helps me feel better about facing an increase in referral. Yeah. Texas curriculum info. Yeah, you can Google those peaks and print out. I would print out the writing peaks so that you have them like in a notebook. OT shouldn't be the only ones to address handwriting. Amen. Evidence-based principles and what is not effective. Tracing is less effective. Yeah. Information that can be found in the handbook. A lot of stuff is in that handbook. New to school-based OT here in Texas. All the information was super helpful. Thank you. Appreciate that. Learning more about and the difference between orthographic processing and graphomotor skills. That was a big learning curve for me as well. I think when I heard the term orthographic processing, I kind of like shut down. I'm like, I don't know what that means. That sounds like teacher talk. So it took me a little while to kind of really get a grasp on what all that meant. All right. You're very welcome. Word form area of the brain. Yep, the letterbox area. SPED versus 504 for writing instruction. Thank you. Reiterate to teachers to not write tracing goals. Oh, please, please, please. Yes, Kelly. That's my biggest soapbox is tracing. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. Thank you so much for being here and for participating in the activities. I really appreciate you guys, and I'll get this stuff sent out hopefully in the morning. The reason why I can't do it today is because I have to correlate all the certificates to the Zoom report that I have to print out about who was here. And that's just part of our record keeping. So that'll just take me a little bit of time. But thank you guys. Have a great afternoon. Bye.